I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Did you get one, Cable?
I'm good. Yep.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Better Sharing of Open Climate Data session. I don't know how many of you have heard, but we have a new project at Creative Commons, and it's called Open Climate Data Project. So we're here to talk to you about it and to hopefully be able to answer any questions that you have and also learn from you. Use this as an opportunity to get your feedback as well about the project that is underway. So to start us off, I'm just going to introduce myself, and Cable will introduce himself. My name is Taylor Campbell. I lead the Open Climate Data Project. I'm visiting from Los Angeles, which is where I live. I recently joined Creative Commons in March, and I think I'm the newest member of the CC team, so it's great to be here at my first Creative Commons Summit ever. And I'm excited to talk about our work and also to share some of my reflections based on just what I've been learning here at the summit as well. About me, I'm a program designer, facilitator, a lifelong learner. My background is in data and technology-driven programs, primarily for governments in the US, but also public service and impact efforts globally. And so my goal for today is to do my best to bring you into the level of understanding that I've been able to gain so far. And I've been privileged to be able to work with Cable Green and Monica, who's over there, who will be speaking later about the Open Climate campaign. But Cable and Monica presented the opportunity to really bring Creative Commons into a new understanding of how to bring its organizational strengths, superpowers, to the climate space with the newly established Open Climate Data Project. So you will hear from Monica later at her session, but I'll pass it to Cable to introduce himself and share about the climate work at CC.
Thank you, Taylor.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to stand when I present.
Oh, yeah.
I have to move around. So I think I know many of you. My name is Cable Green. I'm the Director of Open Knowledge at Creative Commons. It's a new title for me. I used to do just open education was my focus, and then I was CEO for a bit. And open knowledge, the portfolio includes open education, open science, open access research, and open data. And so I've got the privilege of working both with Taylor on open climate data and with Monica, the Open Climate Campaign, which you'll hear about later today. Next slide, please. So Creative Commons, I'm just my role here is short. I'm gonna give just a kind of quick overview and a high-level framework, and then Taylor's gonna tell you about all the good stuff about the project. Creative Commons, as you know, is 20 years old. We just last year had our 20th anniversary. And we all cheered, and there were celebrations around the world, and there were a lot of great things that happened in the last 20 years. While we're happy about that, what we're more interested in is what do we do in the next 20 years. And so as you saw, Creative Commons has a new strategy. We talked about better sharing. There's different strategic objectives. And one of the main ideas that we brought forth as we looked forward and not back is that we want to help solve the biggest problems in the world. And when we talk about that, and Taylor will talk a little bit later about this, we really look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, one of those, or actually several of those, are around climate. And we all are feeling climate change as humanity these days. We thought if we were going to pick one SDG to start with, climate change was probably a good start. So actually, both of these projects are around climate for that reason. Next. And we have a very simple proposition for why should Creative Commons be in this game at all? Why does Creative Commons have a role in helping to solve the world's biggest problems? Are we just trying to grab onto SDGs and grab their coattails and try to get funding? No. We actually believe in our hearts that if you want to solve any of the SDGs or any other major problem, the knowledge about those problems must be open. The culture about those problems must be open. So if you look at the SDGs, for example, gender inequality, education, poverty, life on land, life below water, climate action, the list goes on. All of them are human-caused problems, right? There's knowledge about those problems. There's science about them. There's educational resources about them. There's data about them. But there's also, given that these were human-caused problems, there's culture to be known. These problems were created by humans that existed in a particular culture at a particular time. And if you don't understand that, the knowledge about the problems isn't enough. So that's why, Brigitte, who many of you know, is our Director of Open Culture. She leads that wing of our programs, and I'm the Director of Open Knowledge. I lead that wing of our programs. But we work together because we want to solve the problems. Having culture or knowledge isn't enough. We have to have both. And so this is our sort of core infrastructure argument. So you don't get to solve climate change if the research about climate change is locked up and nobody can read it. You don't get to expect people to change their carbon footprints if, and this is actually a real stat, half of all of the schools in the world have no educational resources or teaching about climate change. So UNESCO just ran that study. Monica will tell you that half of all of the climate research on the planet is closed. You can't get access to it unless you're rich, right? And that's not right. Like, we're not going to solve these big problems if the knowledge and the culture about them is closed. And so that's kind of our very, very base argument and starting point for why we're engaged with these projects. And so you'll hear about the, next slide. This is my last slide here. A little promotion here. Come see Monica, who's right there. She's going to talk at 1 p.m. in the auditorium about the Open Climate Campaign. But today, we're going to focus on our Open Climate Data Project. Again, trying to open up the data so that we can work on solving climate change. And with that, Taylor, tell us about the cool project you're leading.
Sure. Thanks, Cable. Before I jump in to the details, I would like to take a minute to survey the room. Can you please raise your hand if you work with climate data? Okay. Oh, good. And can you maybe just shout out why you're here if you don't work with climate data? I'm just curious, and I want this to maybe be a little bit of a conversation, so anybody? Yeah?
I work with people who work with climate.
You work with people who work with climate data. Great, thank you.
I work with people who work with open science hardware, so sensors, all that kind of stuff. So,
Okay, you work with people who work with open science hardware. Okay, yeah?
I work studying the cause of not having public data.
Oh, wow, really? Okay, that's great. So you work thinking about what it means to not have public data. Yeah. Here.
Okay, so I'm here because I was working on a project and we were to improve data around climate in Africa.
Uh-huh.
And we discovered that there were no open data
Yeah.
that we could use for that project.
Yeah.
So I'm here to see how this could really impact, and I could also learn from your experience.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to repeat it back. So you were working on a project that was attempting to use climate data to address some issues in Africa, and you had issues finding open data to use.
Yes.
Great, yeah.
I'm collecting data about climate change denial in social networks.
Okay, you're interested in hearing about climate change denial.
I'm collecting utterances and doing social network analysis of people who are denying.
Oh, okay. So you're actually studying people who are climate deniers. Interesting. That's really interesting. Any others? Great. Well, thank you for being here. So, yeah, I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about, specifically about one of the motivations for the Climate Data Project. We are, as Cable mentioned, building on the history and the success of Creative Commons as an organization that has been bringing legal expertise to open sharing for the past 20 years, centering around copyright. And because of this foundational work, the world uses CC licenses and tools by default, a standardized way to grant permission to the public to use those works. But today, we're expanding into a new era of what we're calling better sharing. So it's broader than just licensing, and it's opening up a conversation to take on the process of sharing and access more wholesale. So better sharing it's active, it's intentional, it's inclusive, it's just, it's equitable, it's reciprocal, beneficial to all, and sustainable. Everyone in this better sharing context, we hope has a wide opportunity to access content that's needed, or even to contribute their own creativity or their own created works, and receive value, benefits, recognition, rewards for their contributions. And generally, that open participation is happening in the public commons by default. So for the Open Climate Data Project, which I lead, we're focusing on better sharing of climate data specifically. And because data and databases are managed, licensed, shared, governed sort of separately and distinctly, it needed its own set of work for us at Creative Commons. So we're approaching this in 3 parts. One is to understand our organizational motivation, objectives, and approach. 2 is to research the landscape of large climate data sources and how their data is accessed today. And 3 is to convene stakeholders to co-develop and implement better sharing practices. So, I'll go back. I see you were trying to take a picture. Go ahead. Great. So let me share a little bit about our theory of change. We want to be able to use our strengths as an organization to help large climate data institutions better share their climate data with the world. That includes better licensing and also just better sharing practices more broadly, so that more people everywhere can find solutions to the climate crisis. With that approach, we're looking at making sure that we can find free and open climate data more broadly. We're encouraging global collaboration and access. And we are specifically expecting informed research, decision-making, and action. I'm very excited to be a part of this process, dedicating to facilitating this understanding of how Creative Commons can best do this organizationally and to facilitate better sharing among the community network, which extends far beyond Creative Commons and which many of you are representing in some way. So let's jump into something that we started with, which is a landscape analysis. We began this work really by just slowing down and doing research to build a foundational understanding of the permissible uses of existing large climate data sets. Please scan this code because it is going to take you to our landscape analysis, which you can follow along. I'm also just going to talk about it, so if you don't want to scan it right now, that's completely fine. It is. It's available on our Creative Commons website. If you just search climate data landscape analysis, you'll find it. And if you can't find it, just email me, I'll send it to you.
Just a quick Google search of CC Open Climate Data.
Yeah.
Will take you to the page, and then the landscape analysis is linked there.
Thank you, Caleb. So with this landscape analysis, we really wanted to just figure out who is currently sourcing climate data at a large scale. How are they doing it? How open is that climate data? What climate data exists, and what can researchers do with it? So we actually surveyed 25 global climate data providers based on the FAIR principles, which I'll walk us through it in a second so that you can know exactly what we were looking at. And I just want to point out that, we wanted to specifically start with these government agencies and large intergovernmental or regional institutions that produce climate data at a large scale. We want to start with them as our primary stakeholder for this project because they are already producing climate data for the purpose of providing it to the world. But there are a lot of different ways in which we learn through the landscape analysis in which they're actually doing that. So these are our source groups. We refer to them as sources because they are primary data sources for the world. And just to give you a rundown, if you're not looking at the document, for US government, we surveyed the Atmospheric Radiation Measurement Data Center, or ARM. We surveyed EnviroFacts, the Environmental System Science Data Infrastructure for a Virtual Ecosystem, also known as SDIVE, or ESSDIVE. We surveyed the National Centers for Environmental Information at NOAA, which is our oceanic agency, and NASA, which is our space agency. Global organizations, we surveyed GEOS, which is the Group on Earth Observations, the International Energy Agency, a local data group called Sensor.community, the World Bank Group, Climate Change, and the World Resources Institute. Regionally, internationally, we wanted to also look into what data were being provided at large scales internationally outside of the US and Europe and Canada. We surveyed the 3CN database that covers climate data in Latin America, the Asia Pacific Data Research Center, the Chinese Academy of Science Earth, and the IGAD, which I don't remember what it stands for, forgive me, International something, Climate Predictions and Application Center, which focuses on Africa. European governments, we surveyed the Atmosphere Data Store, the CETA Archive, the Climate Data Store, the European Space Agency, and the Met Office, which is the Meteorological Office. Intergovernmentally, we surveyed the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. We surveyed EUMETSAT, which is the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites. We studied the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, and the UN Environment Program, Global Resource Information Database, or GRID, Geneva. So we surveyed this range of organizations so that we can really understand how data is currently being provided to the world. And that information is available in the landscape analysis. Again, if you just got here, you can scan that code and download it for yourself or just Google it later. And this approach really enabled us to assess the current status of the major sources of climate data and ultimately identify what best practices we really want to focus on so that we can encourage and facilitate sharing more effectively moving forward. I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions before I continue. Yeah.
Two quick questions.
Sure.
So the first one is that the project was designed for open climate data.
Correct.
So did you notice any differences in climate data that is like requiring a special project for that, or is it more towards contributing to the climate movement? And the second question, just quickly.
Oh, sure. We're going to have you say it in the mic. I'm sorry.
So the first question is, have you noticed any differences in climate data that require a special project? And the second question is, the survey was mainly towards understanding the sharing behaviors of these organizations. Basically, is that true?
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. And to answer your first question, we specifically looked at the practices around climate data, not necessarily in comparison to other topical domains of data, but just as a starting point. So yes, it is very, very implied almost or definitely assumed that some of these best practices will apply to data under other domains as well. But we specifically are starting with the organizations that provide the climate data because we recognize that there are some specific practices that do apply, especially on the legal and policy side, in terms of sharing that we want to make sure we focused on first, which I can get into a little bit later. Thank you for the question. Any other? Yeah, in the back. And I have lots more to say, but just pausing for questions in the middle.
Yeah, it's not really related to what you said so far, but I'm very practically interested as a researcher, as I'm collecting data. My best interest is to publish them rather than deposit them.
Yeah.
So ideally, I want to publish them somewhere that will give me some additional kudos, or it will get a publication status after being reviewed, ideally. So from this point of view, I can either submit to Nature, Data Repository, right, or somewhere else. It will be reviewed, published, and I will get an award from my university, or I can just dump it somewhere without review. The question is, to what extent you want to what extent you're open to combining those two models? Because I understand that there's a lot of value in allowing a lot of data into data sets, but there's also value in providing something more curated, something that is academically reviewed.
Yeah. That's actually, if you can pass the mic to Monica. Sorry, Monica. So the Open Climate Campaign Project actually focuses on research more broadly, and we recognize in that process that that the data that's collected in the research process is kind of a related consideration. But I think Monica can say a little bit more to address your specific question. Is that okay, Monica?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So the project that Taylor is leading is getting really big climate data sets that are coming from examples like monitoring, like NASA's doing a lot of monitoring. They do satellite data. These are really big data sets that are just like taken as part of the mandate of the institution or the agency. In your example, you're talking about data that's associated with the research project that you're doing probably at your institution. And what the Open Climate Campaign side of it is encouraging you to do what you just did, which is ultimately is just to make that data available. And so if you submit it to something like, Nature Data, you get a DOI for it, you put it on your CD, that's great, have it connected to your original publication, and ideally just both of those are openly accessible, that both your paper and the data associated with it is openly available. And that's what we're encouraging you to do so that that data can then be used by other researchers. So they're sort of like two different sides of the same issue, but I think the practice that you're doing is great, and recognizing that getting something like a DOI for the data is also really important. And I think those things can happen in parallel.
Thank you for that, Monica. Thank you. So I'm just going to breeze through some of the specific dimensions that we are zooming in on as we look at the openness and the sharing practices of these organizations. So under the category of findability, again, we're referencing FAIR principles, F-A-I-R, as our model. This is a data sharing framework that is solid and we love. So the first is F for findability. And so these are some of the questions that we asked as we surveyed these organizations in detail. For findability, is the climate data findable on the website via a search function? Does the climate data use digital object identifiers or other persistent identifiers so that it can be found? Are these identifiers included in a metadata schema? And is the data made available in external or federated searches? And these all contribute to the findability of that source data. Under the category of accessibility, which is the A in FAIR, we focused on the questions of, is the data available to the public and offered for free? It's binary, yes or no. But also it's not that binary, because some of them were like, yeah, some of our data is, or it depends. So that was really interesting to kind of uncover. And then, can users access data directly, or are they required to first register for an account or provide any other information? Under interoperability, we asked if the data is provided in machine-readable formats without requiring any special software, and if the data is hosted locally on that website, or are users required to navigate externally in order to access it. And for reusability, we focused on questions that pertain more specifically to the licensing work that we're already accustomed to doing at CC. So we were wondering if the data is made available in the public domain. If not, are they provided under specific licenses? And do those licenses include making them available for commercial purposes or not? There are other questions that fall under the FAIR principles framework. These are the ones that we wanted to start with as we really took our time to understand these 25 organizations and the data that they provide. So from there, once we completed the landscape analysis, we had a very clearly illustrated opportunity to co-develop a community sharing standard for openly licensing and sharing climate data. Because we want to see best practices for a united global approach to maximizing data access, sharing, and reuse. So we're working in partnership with several of the institutions that we surveyed to do this together, recognizing that Creative Commons can bring facilitation and can bring lots of legal expertise, but also recognizing that these practitioners and experts, collectively, we need each other to figure out what the best sharing standards are for climate data globally moving forward. So we worked with the European Space Agency, NASA, and NOAA in the US, EUMETSAT and ECMWF, GEO, the International Energy Agency, and the World Resources Institute. So we're currently convening this working group on a monthly basis through the end of this year. And our collective goal, is to just compile and share information about climate data access, learn about the obstacles, learn about how the sharing standards that we establish together can address those obstacles directly. Our primary audience for this is these large climate data providing sources and source institutions. But we also hope that these institutions can kind of set a precedent for other organizations and other efforts, all the way down to just community scientists or community researchers who are interested in understanding how they might also contribute their data or access data for their research needs. So one of the things that I want to point out that I actually learned from this group or through the process, the research process in general, is that these organizations are already very grounded in open sharing practices and policies. We're not in a position to have to convince them to do the basics, right? Many are already shaped by policies, broader policies like the WMO policy, GEO policy. There are already standards and best practices that exist that are helping to govern the sharing of large climate data. So we have a unique opportunity to identify where there might be gaps in policy currently together, and to also understand how we can design processes that allow us to actually implement in a more effective way for these organizations. One success story is that recently, just a couple weeks ago, NASA publicly committed to what they're calling making Earth data fair. So they're also and that's just an example. That's not because of anything that we've done. That's because the practice of better sharing of climate data is already it's already a practice that these organizations are open to embracing. So I'm looking forward to being able to share the outputs of this working group with you all in the new year. We're going to be developing recommendations that touch on legal decisions, legal and licensing decisions naturally, but also metadata schema, governance, user interfaces, interorganizational partnerships, data sharing agreements. These are all topics that have arisen from the working group that we recognize are contributors to this idea of better sharing as a whole. Some of the challenges that we've observed from the working group, I just want to share, just to be realistic here, include that climate data sharing does not have a one-size-fits-all solution. The working group is made up of 9 different organizations, and each kind of has a different approach to their methods of collecting, governing, and providing climate data. So it's been really exciting, actually, to understand how we might find common ground among those differences. The second that came up is that they all kind of operate within unique legal and institutional frameworks. So we recognize that one of the next steps for this project will be for us to enter into a role of facilitation and training and consulting so that we can really help each institution individually with the implementation plan and the implementation needs that it has. And the third is recommendations, consider and balance these diverse constraints. So again, we want to be able to, we are going to put out guidance that really helps set a baseline that we hope these organizations will build on for themselves.
Taylor, before you go to
Yeah.
the next slide, this was really insightful, I think, for us. So for example, we went into this thinking from Creative Commons standpoint, well, the data should be in the public domain. And so the recommendation we want on reusability is to, wherever possible and appropriate, to make sure that, first of all, the data is probably already in the public domain, but let's ensure it's in the public domain by using CC0, our public domain dedication. Of course, but the European agencies that are part of the group said, now wait a minute, we have database rights and sui generis rights on data in Europe, and so sometimes we use CC licenses. We don't always use CC0. And one of the agencies even said, we're funded by our government, and if we can't show that we're receiving attribution when people use our data sets, which is what we can guarantee legally when we use CC BY, as opposed to using CC0, our existence is actually at risk. And these were things like we hadn't even imagined would have come up. So we went into it thinking, well, of course CC0 will be the recommendation, and what we came out with, and what the recommendation very likely will be, is, yeah, CC0 if you can do it, but if you are in these kinds of scenarios, CC BY might be a good alternative. And it's kind of a weird thing for us to say at Creative Commons because, legally, facts about nature are not copyrightable. And most of this climate data, if not all of it, are facts about nature. And yet there are jurisdictions which allow them to get copyright over the arrangement of that data, the arrangement of the database. Those are creative acts in some jurisdictions and not others. And so it was kind of this interesting dance between what's legally accurate and what the community needs, what these organizations need to get to better sharing of climate data in their orgs. And to be blunt about it, some of them said, look, if this recommendation says it has to be CC0, we might have to drop out of the group. Like, we might not be able to put our name on this thing in the end. So it was really, really interesting. And, and we came to a compromise of, okay, let's do CC0 or CC BY. But I think it was a good example of not being too set in our ways and be ready to compromise if you want to work in coalition to move the ball forward on big, important issues.
Yeah, and I love that you added that because that was great for us.
Do you have any more insights about in the report? Because this is, of course, really interesting for us.
You said, do we have any more insights that are not in the report?
That these kind of things.
Yeah, so these insights are actually coming from this second phase. After we completed the landscape analysis is when we started convening the partners for the working group and to co-develop the sharing standard. All of those insights are going to be in that report that's coming out next. Yeah, so we're just giving you a little bit of sneak preview. I wish we would have been able to share the report here today, but it's just not finished yet. So we're going to have a few more meetings before now and the end of the year. And yes, we'll definitely be sharing all of those insights as well, because that takes it a step further, right? It's not just what we're able to observe via surveys. And we did have some conversations for the landscape analysis, but the sharing standard is really designed to address those specific insights with practical solutions and recommendations that we hope not only those institutions can employ, but the rest of the world can as well.
If you don't mind, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, I'll repeat it.
The challenges that you faced within this community group purpose is different from other communities that you've been working in to establish something like this?
Okay, so the question was,
Cultural institutions, do they have different arguments why they would not share?
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, did we notice any differences between the challenges faced by this open climate data group and groups that maybe are working in other domains or other, that we might also be working with collectively to come to an agreement or a plan? I think that's a capable question, yeah. I've only worked with this group, so.
I think it's different, but they're not things that we haven't seen before. So these are, by definition, we wanted to work with the largest climate data hosts and producers and providers on the planet. These are big organizations. I mean, this is the European Space Agency. This is NASA. This is NOAA. These are big, big orgs. And because they're big bureaucracies. They're slow ships that are slow to turn. They have policy. If they have a policy in place, you can't just go in and change the policy quickly. Like, it's going to take 2 years to change it through 7 different committees. And so, they come with that inertia. What was really interesting is a lot of them actually joined because they were already in the process of having a similar conversation in their orgs. Yeah. So at least, 2 or 3 of the organizations said, we are right now updating our data sharing policies. And that's why we joined, because we wanted to be part of the best practices and be on the avant-garde of having discussions about this. Yeah. And so they saw it was in their self-interest to participate. Yeah. They also, we said this to them, we said, you are the largest, and partially because of your size, the most important climate data sets on the planet. And we want you to co-create with us this better sharing standard for climate data so that others will follow. Yeah. Like, we couldn't invite everybody on the planet that's doing climate data collection. It's just, that would be thousands or more entities, right? So we invited the biggest, and then part of them co-creating it means they have ownership in it. Mm-hmm. And so, to answer your question, these are similar challenges and also similar tactics that we use with national governments when we're working with them, because they're also big in bureaucracies and policy changes slowly. It's different than GLAM institutions, it's different than educational institutions, but it's not different than working with national governments or provincial or state governments on any of these topics. So I would say what was different about this group is the size of these orgs. You really have to listen to them and respect the structures and the policies that they have in place. And we said to them from the outset, we do not expect you to fully change your organizations to be in line with this standard. We know that that's unreasonable. You might get there in 5 years, and that's great. If you can make some small changes to be better sharing than what you are today, that's fabulous. And Taylor talked about how we're going to go out and do consulting with these orgs. Like, we're going to go on site and bring our general counsel with us and our trainers with us and actually work, with orgs that want to work with us to help move the needle, to help move them faster toward better sharing and implementation of the standard.
Yeah. Yes.
So I've been hearing so many
Uh-huh.
And I was just curious to know, like, you made mention of findability.
Wait, hold on 1 second. He's gonna hand you the mic. Sorry, I keep forgetting.
Okay, so I was saying that there are a lot of discussions around sharing of climate data, and I'm just curious to know, have you also like, what were some of the discussions that maybe generated out of the findability
Mhm.
and accessibility of the data?
Yeah.
I would just want to know, like, what are some of the discussions around it
Yeah.
based on some of your conversation with this organization? Also, another question would be that, have you also thought about involving the end users of this climate data in your discussions? I just wanted to know if they are also like part of who you intend to maybe hold some series of discussions with, and not just the organizations itself.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, these are great questions. So to address your first question about some of the insights pertaining to findability and accessibility, yes. So one that I can share is that we had a long discussion with the working group about metadata, its uses, its potential, and its relevance in terms of being able to automate the ways in which data is found. It's rare, it's more rare for someone to say, oh, let me go specifically to this source institution's website and specifically find this specific data that I am looking for. A lot of times when people are doing research, they're looking generally about the domain that they're looking for, and they're compiling data sets from lots of different places, and they're kind of bouncing around, right? So we've had an in-depth discussion about metadata and how metadata is one central place that we can all align and focus to help facilitate that process more smoothly across the board. And that's not just something that should be specific to climate data institutions. It should be specific to data providers, period. But that's a kind of a data sharing and data governance practice that specifically applies to this group, because a lot of these organizations historically were positioned to do the job of collecting the data, and have now, and as Cable mentioned, are kind of in processes currently of thinking about how do we improve on our policies in terms, like how do we do this better? One of the main new areas of conversation for a lot of these organizations is thinking about how people are actually finding and using their information, and not expecting everyone to come to them, but positioning the data technologically so that it can be found no matter where or how someone's looking for it. Another dimension of that is the use of the identifiers. DOIs are kind of a industry standard now, but any type of identifier that's a part of the metadata schema, but that allows people to be able to understand and track the provenance, understand and track how data has been referenced or used, through different sources and through different places. So yes, a lot of what we're talking about now in the findability and accessibility categories are actually areas where the participating institutions are just new to the conversation, but are ready and willing to bring their data out even further with those practices. Your second question, I'm sorry.
Okay. So my second question was, you've been having this engagement with the
Oh, yes, with the users.
So what happens to the engagement?
Yes. So 100%. It doesn't make sense for us to do this project if we're not also eventually having the same conversations with users, right? We're starting here. We're starting with the sources, the institutions. We're establishing best practices. And then we literally have plans for future phases of this work where we intentionally also speak not only to users and researchers, but also to, I guess, what I would call like intermediary organizations that might not be as big as NASA, but are still very much active in the climate data space. There are a lot of community-based organizations, for example, that collect data on air quality in local neighborhoods, right? Or water quality in local neighborhoods. So we want to fit them into the better sharing conversation as well. We're just doing it kind of in a sequenced way. Awesome. Okay, so I have one more slide, 2 more slides. So a little bit about opportunities. We've kind of already touched on it, but I'll still share. We have an opportunity to provide hands-on guidance to these institutions, which we're looking forward to. And we also have an opportunity to collaborate with additional organizations, like I just mentioned, and expand partnerships into new regions for broader impact. This working group is very US and Euro heavy. In fact, it's 100% US and Euro. And so this, we have a huge opportunity to expand into new regions and understand context that applies globally, and also, to your point, bringing in users, researchers, because all of these groups kind of play a role in what it means to actually achieve better sharing. Okay, so I also going to pass it back to Cable to share a little bit about a specific partnership that we're excited about that's related to the development of these climate data sharing standards, and then we'll take questions.
So this really goes to your question about end users and use. So if this project is phase 1, which is, okay, let's figure out how to make all the big climate data in the world easier to get access to, better legal rights on it, et cetera, so it's easier to share. Then phase 2 might be, how do we actually get that data to people, right? So you can actually do useful things with it. We have partnered with Norway and the Norwegian government, and we're going to build something called the Open Earth Platform Initiative. This is going to be an open source software stack that will leverage all of the good work that Taylor is leading with these organizations. So we're going to pull API feeds from all of these large climate data sets into this public infrastructure, digital public good, open source software technology stack. It'll be a platform, if you will. And then in this stack, there will be service layers, where if you want to, say, build an app on how to reduce your own personal climate footprint, or maybe you are a developer of homes and you want to know what's sea level rise going to do to this coastline, and should I build or not in the next decade? You'll be able to actually pull data out of this stack. So I think everybody knows, Norway has its seed bank, where they bank seeds from around the world, so if climate change gets too bad, we can replant plants that we may have lost because they burned up. Think of this as an open climate data bank with a service layer built on top of it. And so I don't know if you also know about the Digital Public Goods Alliance or not. This is another project that Norway funds, and this is all about, basically, if something can be digital, if it can be digital and it's useful to one country, it might be useful to somebody else. And so take this digital thing, openly license it, make it a digital public good, and share it. And so that's sort of so if you haven't seen the Digital Public Goods Alliance, it's a great project. It's UNICEF and NORAD out of Norway are kind of the co-leads of it. Creative Commons was involved in helping the Digital Public Goods writing the Digital Public Goods Standard. But this comes out of that, right? So this says, look, let's make this actionable. Let's actually make this data useful, and let's make it public infrastructure. This is not commercial. This is not about extractive mechanisms. This is about maximizing sharing and maximizing the use for end users and researchers and scientists and educators and anybody else that might want to get access to this great climate data.
Thank you, Cable. Time for questions. I think we're just gonna ask them all, and Jose, you can take it around, and then we'll answer them all. Thank you.
Thank you both for all of that information. I think it's really fascinating. I lead IFLA's climate policy work, and I'm really interested to know, especially in that final part table that you spoke about, this creation of platforms, and I think we've been doing a lot of work engaging with the UNFCCC, and in both the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC, there is the distinct obligation to create public access to climate information. And I wonder if you're considering a larger advocacy opportunity around this. And in addition, an angle of our work in the library field is looking at archival material and documentary heritage as climate information, as climate data, like old maps showing, So I wonder if there's any sort of opportunity to mesh this more cultural heritage perspective with this kind of hard science-driven data perspective on these sorts of platforms in the future, so we're not working in silos.
So great questions. Anybody else have questions? We want to just answer it first?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
forget if I don't answer.
Okay, that's fine. We'll answer it.
I'll answer quick. So two things. One is, what I showed you is phase one of the open, so it's phase two of sharing climate data, but it's phase one of the Open Earth Platform Initiative for the next year. Think it's a planning project. So we're designing, we're writing policies about how this would work. Phase two of that project will actually be to build the stack. That'll start in 2024, probably wrap in 2025. Whether or not that Open Climate platform only hosts the hard science climate data, or it includes other things that you talked about, like cultural old maps, et cetera,
Archival.
of climate, I don't know, but I'll ask the question, or you could ask the question. I don't know if you know Christer Gunderson at NORAD. Christer's the lead of this. I think it's very interesting. So the second part of my answer there would be going back to the first thing I said at the very beginning of this presentation, which is we at Creative Commons believe that we need both open knowledge and open culture to really properly address and provide context around these challenges. In fact, the presentation that Monica and Brigitte will be doing later really goes right at the heart of that question. And so, yes, I'm with you on that. Whether or not this project will just do the data or not, I don't know, because we're not running the project, we're just a partner in it.
Right.
But we can certainly ask the question. As far as advertising it and sort of joining forces and making sure people know about it, absolutely. I would say that's probably going to be most appropriate in late 2024 and 2025, once we actually start to have services available.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. So since this is a project, then probably regard to the timeline, I would have asked your presentation that first started with a survey, more conversations, and then some sort of principles or guidelines on how to share the data, and more implementation in addition to engagement with other organizations. But then with the piece of information you just mentioned about like all of these organizations being based in these, like in the US and Europe, this gets me a bit concerned because we see it all the time that principles or guidelines are advertised as being global thing, but it was only based on regions that do not really represent everything else. And you have no idea how hard it is to convince people in Africa or in Asia not to follow these principles because it's not 100% applies to them. And we find out with the open access, for example, policies and stuff like that. And it just gets me a bit concerned. Is there a way of at least engaging one or two agencies, or at least do the open, the recommendations of the UNESCO, for example, the Open Science recommendations, where they actually send it out to the organizations and give your feedback before we adopt it, if there are any intentions to do that. And at the end of this, it sounds more like a project. More like a program than a project, or is that just like phases, or do you have like an expected end date for getting that out from the guidelines and things?
Yes. I'll take the mic back and then. Thank you for that question, those questions. So your first question was about the concerns around establishing a global effort that's not actually globally designed, and then expectations of adoption that might not actually be realistic. No, I think that's a very core piece of our consideration in our approach. We actually, so I don't think that the opportunity is lost at all. I think that the opportunity is just slightly delayed, and this is why. So one of the things that we decided on in terms of our methodology was starting with the largest and most pervasive climate data providers. They are in the US and in Europe. They just are, right? So a part of our implementation plan and our, well, first of all, let me just take a step back. There is no official end, like there's no like, these are the rules, everybody, lock it up, throw away the key, no changes ever, right? Everything that we create is intended to be iterated upon as we continue to learn. So we're relying on that as an open door for continual iteration and evolution as we hopefully engage more and more entities around the world. We started off with the specific groups for that reason, and we also have been simultaneously building relationships with the broader set of groups that are in our landscape analysis, and even beyond that, requesting that the folks who are willing to work with us continue to play another role in connecting us with additional sources and spaces that we can have that. So that's one way that we're just kind of doing it passively. Actively though, on the research, on the implementation and promotional marketing, once we have it, we're like, we want everybody to know about it, we want everybody to talk about it. That's gonna be in part a listening tour. It's not just, hey, we want you to do these things, thank you very much, bye. It's an opportunity for us to listen and learn. So we're prioritizing entering into other spaces regionally that we have not been in yet at all, because otherwise we're actually not doing our job if we fail to do that. Your second question was about the, sorry, I always forget the second question.
Is there any expected date?
End date, yeah. So we are specifically expecting to produce the sharing the best practices at the beginning of the new year, after which we will be ongoing in the process of socializing, having those conversations, iterating upon the guidances, and learning where else we might be able to establish programmatically additional areas of service. Cable, did you want to add something?
No, we're just out of time.
Oh,
We've
sorry.
been queued, so please
Sorry,
thank
out of
Taylor
time.
for a great presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cable. And thanks to Cable, and thank you for being here. I'm happy to answer more questions afterward, too. Thank you so much. Okay.